Well, good afternoon. People may be trickling in a little bit, but I'll go ahead and start. Welcome to Stimson. My name is YUKI TATSUMI. I'm a co-director of East Asia program and the director of the Japan program here at Stimson. Today I'm delighted to introduce our most recent publication that's what we named as the Views from the Next Generation series. This is the project that's been ongoing for the last 5 years, including this one. The purpose of the project is to introduce rising scholars in Japan who works on various foreign policy issues to the Washington, D.C. audience. They are already pretty well known in Japan and therefore in high demand already, but for various reasons, they really haven't had much opportunity to travel and speak on their own and they share their thoughts on the public forum like this. So this Views from the Next Generation series, every year we pick out each topic, whether that's regional or functional, and then we identify 4 to 5 scholars in that area and ask them to write a short policy paper, not the lengthy academic ones, but the very short work, and we make it into a compiled, the edited volume, which is I think outside this room. So feel free to bring your own copy either before or after this event. This year, given what's going on in Iran and North Korea, I thought nuclear deterrence and disarmament, which is the conundrum for Japan's post-war foreign policy, might be a good topic to tackle. And these 4 scholar is going to make us all a little smarter about how Japan looks at various aspects of this issue. Sitting right immediate left to me is Dr. HEIGO Sato. He's from Takushoku University. He's the exception in this volume in the sense that he's not a new generation. He has been in the area for quite a long time. So I did ask him to write kind of a capstone piece that actually looks at really this dilemma that Japan's foreign policy had between its very strong commitment to nuclear disarmament, but the reality necessity to maintain a strong nuclear deterrence. Next to him is Dr. MUKAI. She teaches at Asia University in Tokyo, and she's one of the rising scholars that looks at the nuclear deterrent and the regional security. And she will focus. I asked her to focus on the East Asia. Next to her is Dr. KURITA from the National Institute of Defense Studies, who looks at the South Asia example and what Japan may be able to detect from that as Japan tries to grapple with the ongoing North Korean nuclear problem. And when Japan looks at the nuclear deterrent issue, it is almost how U.S. looks at this is an integral part of its strategic thinking. So I asked Dr. MURANO, who's sitting far left of me, to look into that. We are missing one author. If you already looked at the index of it, Dr. OKUDA, who looked at the Iran nuclear agreement, is not able to join us. He's in the job transition. So, but we did catch him in a video. So after Dr. Kurita's remarks, we will broadcast a short video in which he will talk about his own segment of his paper. And Dr. Sato actually flew in from Japan this morning, so I wanted to give him a little buffer of either his flight delay or immigration long line, which is not unusual these days. So I first asked Dr. MUKAI to talk about her own chapter, and we'll go down toward the end to Dr. Murano, and then we'll cycle back to Dr. Sato to wrap up. I asked each of them to give roughly 10 minutes initial remarks, and then after that we'll dive into the Q&A, and we'll welcome your comments as well. So with that, MUKAI-san.
Okay, thank you. Is this on? Is this on?
Oh,
okay, thank you very much, Yuki-san. and also to the Stimson Center for giving me this wonderful opportunity to not only write a paper, but also to come to Washington, D.C., which I seldom do, and to talk about nuclear deterrence and nuclear disarmament and the role that Japan should take and the policies that Japan should go. So as Yuki-san said, one of the biggest challenges Japan faces today, I think, is to seek a balance between the policy of nuclear deterrence in the short run, and but also at the same time, think about the policies of nuclear deterrence in the longer run. And to make this decision on which position to take, I think is not an easy task. And of course, when we look at the framework from East Asia, there are a lot of factors that can shape or determine or maybe change the way that Japan would go or the security situation as a whole in East Asia. But here in my paper, I actually focused on three factors, which I think are important when we think about Japan's policy towards the future. And these three are, the first is North Korea, the second is China, and the third is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So I'm going to go through one by one and try to talk a little bit about the current situation and the problems that can be raised from that situation. And at the end, I would boldly like to recommend three suggestions towards Japan's future. So first is North Korea. And we all know that North Korea has been engaging in multiple nuclear and missile tests for the past few years. It has a young and aggressive leader, which is engaging in brinksmanship, and does not so much care about being isolated from the rest of the world, let alone criticism by the international community. Now, things may move a bit in a way unexpected, since now we might have the possibility of President Trump and Kim Jong-un meeting in May. But I believe that we cannot be over-expecting the situation or be too optimistic about the situation, since North Korea has not really changed its game that it has engaged in the past. So challenges from the North Korean situation is that, with a big question mark for Japan, is that are we, in this we, I think, Japan and also the international community, but are we prepared to live with a nuclear North Korea? Or are we determined to seek a path for it to give up its nuclear arsenals? So there are two paths that we can think about. Unfortunately, none of the measures taken so far have led North Korea to shift its nuclear policies and let go of its nuclear weapons. And so the current situation only can allow Japan to rely on the nuclear umbrella provided by the United States as a security tool, since clearly the security environment in East Asia is deteriorating. So this leads to the second point that I want to make, is about China. And China has been aggressively expanding its military budget for at least a quarter century at a very fast pace, as you all know. It is developing and improving its nuclear and missile capability, advancing its comprehensive military modernization program, which altogether is a part of its efforts to improve its ability to conduct and enhance its strategic deterrence capability. Now, these activities, I think, as a sovereign state, is completely understandable in a way. Yet China has yet to set forth a decisive future vision of these acts, claiming it to be a peaceful development, but it also lacks transparency. And this lack of transparency has invited suspicion and concerns from regional countries, including Japan. So the issue of mistrust of China's military buildup has been and continues to be a great concern, not only for the regional countries, but especially for Japan. But a more complicated question and problem that lies beneath China, I think, compared to North Korea's case, is that, of course, both countries lack transparency. But when we think about the threat perspective and the wordings used to describe North Korea and China, there are a little difference between those two. So while North Korea is considered to be, and I quote, the most urgent and dangerous threat to peace and security, China is considered to be one of the, and I quote, strategic challenges to regional peace and prosperity. So you see a little difference in the wording when you describe the security threat towards North Korea and China. And I think this is because China is considered to be, in part, a vital player in the field, for example, in international economy, and has a huge influence throughout the world. And it is easy, I think, to condemn North Korea with its unilateral character as being the urgent military threat. But we must not forget that China also has its threats buried beneath its legitimate position, supported by the rapid economic growth. So seeing China as a threat versus it being a vital player in the international community and in certain international issues is what allows China to take advantage of its current position, being vague in its military activities without facing a full condemnation, as the case of North Korea. So my third point is on the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And Dr. Sato, I think, will have a very strong voice in this matter. So I'm just going to slightly go through my part. But in a more global level, so I talked about North Korea and China, which is rather a regional level issue. But on a more global level, towards prohibiting nuclear weapons, including the creation of the treaty, has somewhat created an environment for countries such as Japan to confront the issue of nuclear deterrence and the future of nuclear weapons as a whole. And there used to always be this implicit gap between the haves and have-nots, and also the so-called umbrella states and the purely non-nuclear weapon states. But this treaty has actually elevated this gap into a more explicit one, forcing Japan to give out or concretely let the international community know which position it would take. So this is actually bringing Japan into a position where Japan needs to think about deterrence, disarmament, and its future position. So suggestions for Japan from these three perspectives, and I will lay out three. Then the first one is to set a suitable environment for nuclear disarmament to be pursued. So Japan, as a country, is not in the center position of actually doing something when it comes to nuclear disarmament. So Japan does not own its own nuclear weapons, thus decreasing the number of the arsenals that exist in the world today. Japan cannot do that. So Japan has to think really hard from a different angle how to contribute to nuclear disarmament, not just saying that it promotes nuclear disarmament, but actually thinking of practical ways that it can contribute. And if security concerns are considered one of the strongest motivations for a country to possess nuclear weapons, then I think easing tensions and strengthening confidence and building trust in the region is worth doing. And in the case of East Asia, I think is an important step to stabilize the region as a whole. Of course, the tricky part is that North Korea already has a certain amount of nuclear capability. So therefore, easing tensions and stabilizing the region may not be enough when dealing with the current situation of East Asia. So that's the tricky part. My second suggestion is a little bit bolder than the first one, but trying at least to think or analyze or studying or whichever language suits Japan, but thinking of perhaps moving beyond the notion of nuclear deterrence in the longer run. It would be important for Japan to think so, or at least trying to start thinking about that because it would be an important signal for the international community to let it know that Japan thinks that nuclear weapons may become less important, and I hope so, but less important when considering security policies. So Japan is hugely and heavily is relying on nuclear weapons at the moment. But if we kind of angle in that position, maybe the international community might get a signal that Japan is trying something in thinking about nuclear deterrence. And my final point or suggestion is finding a way for Japan, perhaps in the longer run, to join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Now, I understand that currently that is not the position of the Japanese government, and there are a lot of conditions that have to be met. But at the same time, I think it is not enough for Japan to simply reconcile its current position. I think Japan has to, again, I think Japan has to also signal out that it is thinking hard in trying to take a unique position in thinking about disarmament and deterrence. And one way, I think, is to try not to follow the footsteps of the United States too much, but to try and seek its original position, at least, or try to find certain conditions that Japan can agree upon when it comes to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mukai-san. So as she alluded to, Dr. Sato wraps it up in a way that he will cycle back at this issue that Japan is grappling with when it comes to a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. But this volume actually considers two, I would call it as case studies that Japan needs to be, which is important for Japan when it looks at its most immediate concern, which is North Korea. And one of such case study comes from South Asia. So, Kurita-san.
Thank you, Tatsumi-san. First, let me express my deep gratitude to Stimson Center and Tatsumi-san for inviting me to this conference.
Can't hear you very well.
Sorry. Actually, I'm mainly working on South Asian security issues as a researcher of National Institute for Defense Studies. And my personal research interest mainly focuses on South Asian nuclear issues like India and Pakistan's doctrine or that kind of things. But recently, actually, the only one topic I'm asked to write or talk about is not nuclear. That is China-Pakistan economic corridor. So I'm really glad that I can speak about kind of South Asian nuclear issues. And as Tatsumi-san introduced, my chapter is not focusing directly on Japanese policy choice on nuclear issues, but kind of lessons. What kind of lessons can we learn from other experience of nuclear proliferation? And my chapter focuses on South Asia. And specifically, my chapter intend to do is analyzing what kind of lesson can we draw from 2 decades of American engagement with India and Pakistan since their 1998 nuclear tests, about engagement with a new nuclear power born out of non-proliferation failure to ensure kind of responsible stewardship of their nuclear capabilities. In the first place, India and Pakistan's nuclearization was a kind of failure of the international non-proliferation efforts. And in the wake of their test in 1998, the United States shifted its goal from rolling back of the nuclear capabilities to kind of nudging their policies in the more moderate and responsible direction. In concrete terms, which means that restraining rapid and boundless expansion of the nuclear arsenals, reducing the likelihood of actual nuclear use, and preventing the spread of sensitive materials and technologies from their programs. With these goals in mind, the United States launched engagement with India and Pakistan on their respective nuclear policies at the turn of the century. And as you know, 20 years after that, India, with a kind of defensive nuclear posture and an exemplary non-proliferation record, has come to be regarded as a kind of responsible nuclear state and has basically achieved recognition of its nuclear status in the international nuclear order. In that process, American engagement has played a certain important role in strengthening India's non-proliferation measures, in particular its export control systems, in the process of the US-India civil nuclear cooperation deal, and India's gradual accommodation into the international nuclear order, especially kind of multilateral export control regimes. And besides, such civil nuclear deal or kind of accommodation into the nuclear order have to some extent encouraged India to adopt kind of moderate or defensive nuclear posture. And on the other hand, Pakistan remains a kind of nuclear outlier, still struggling with the stigma of the proliferation network operated by the Dr. A.Q. Khan, which was revealed in 2004. And because of this problem, in Pakistan's case, American engagement has focused on nuclear security and export control aspect. And on these fronts, it has made kind of tangible and significant achievements. Islamabad has also cooperated very actively to promote kind of its responsible image and gain recognition on par with India in the international nuclear order. However, the long shadow of the Khan network and Pakistan's nuclear posture, which is often described as shifting toward a more offensive or destabilizing direction, has hindered Pakistan from gaining equal treatment with India, which is serious frustration for Islamabad. So given these points, so what kind of lessons on engagement with a new nuclear power born out of non-proliferation failure can be drawn from these South Asian cases? Maybe 3 points. And plus one thing I should be mentioned. First, what should be noted first is that maybe we must be cautious in regarding India's case as a model. India's case is often described as a kind of success in this kind of engagement, but this success in terms of ensuring responsible stewardship of nuclear capability by a newcomer was made possible by a unique facilitating foundation, which is really unique to India. I mean that, India's political leadership has traditionally regarded nuclear weapon as kind of political instrument whose purpose is confined to deterring war, and this perception has led to its rejection of so-called nuclear war fighting with a vast nuclear arsenal and sort of sophisticated operational plans. In addition to that, India's robust conventional defense capability, not only against Pakistan, but even against China since 1980s, has also contributed to limiting the role of nuclear weapons in India's security policies. Moreover, given India's political leadership's inclination towards kind of a global nuclear disarmament or a nuclear free world, it was quite natural for New Delhi not to oppose the non-proliferation norm itself, even when it was a vocal opponent of the international non-proliferation regimes. And above all, American engagement with India was sustained and actually facilitated by their strategic rapprochement, driven by much broader strategic calculation between US and India, like kind of countering China or even kind of commercial interests. And this kind of driver was so strong even to the extent that some problematic aspects of India's nuclear policies were largely sidelined in the overall narrative of successful US-Indian partnership or kind of responsible India. So, these factors cannot be universal. This is the first point. And second, from this perspective, perhaps we should rather focus on what was achieved in Pakistan's case. Despite lacking the same facilitating foundation as India, Pakistan cooperated with the US and achieved certain results in ensuring nuclear security and preventing outward proliferation. This is all the more remarkable considering Pakistan's deep suspicion of the US and the international non-proliferation regimes. This may suggest two things. One, how strong the incentive for a nuclear outlier to legitimize its nuclear possession internationally is. And second, for that purpose, committing to non-proliferation and exponential control is a kind of relatively acceptable way for them to earn points. And third point, as for nuclear postures, implication of broader regional deterrence structure seems significant. On the one hand, in India's case, because of its robust conventional capability, India can afford to limit the role of nuclear weapons in its security policy and can afford to adopt a kind of defensive nuclear posture, thereby assuring the international audience. On the other hand, in fall 2015, when talks on kind of potential US-Pakistan nuclear deal came up, Pakistan refused to restrain its expansion of tactical nuclear weapons, citing the need to counter India's conventional war doctrine. From Islamabad's perspective, what is destabilizing in South Asia is not their tactical nuclear weapons, but India's limited conventional war doctrine. So this contrast indicates the role of the broader regional deterrence architecture beyond the nuclear level as precondition to elicit restraint from a nuclear power on its nuclear posture. So these 3 points are the lessons I want to highlight. And finally, let me mention one thing. If we seek a clue to the solution of the proliferation issue in East Asia, I mean North Korea, by examining this South Asian case, we must take one point into consideration. That is to say, for addressing North Korean case, unfortunately, the South Asian model itself is not a suitable reference point, although respective lessons can be useful. In South Asian case, coercive elements such as sanctions were relatively limited in American engagement with not only India, but even with Pakistan, mainly because Washington has interests in improving its relation with both capitals due to other strategic considerations than the proliferation, especially in its most crucial phase at the turn of the century. As you know, sanctions imposed on India and Pakistan were far more limited than what is applied to North Korea right now. And even those limited sanctions were lifted relatively quickly. Of course, this is not surprising, considering the kind of different legal standings of the nuclear developments. But the point here is that the utility of coercive measures in shaping a nuclear proliferators policy cannot be thoroughly explored or examined through the South Asian experience. Maybe we must devise a strategy appropriately balancing coercive pressures and negotiations for North Korea. And in my sense, it may look much different from what was adopted in South Asia. I stop here.
Hello everyone, my name is MASAHIRO, a student of Takushoku University Graduate School of Japan. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in the project, and also I apologize that I cannot attend in today's conference. This time, I will report with pre-recorded presentation. In my report, I tried to explore the implication from Iran nuclear agreement on security issue of Japan. Specifically, it is a consideration about the problem of negotiation for resolving the nuclear problem of North Korea. I hope this report will contribute to thinking of this recent trend. First of all, I would like to explain my thought on the current situation and background of the Iran nuclear agreement. The nuclear agreement in 2050 was implemented from January 2060. However, it can be said that it is unstable whether it can maintain the framework of this agreement. An important turning point that led to the present situation was that President Trump did not certify the Iran's compliance of the nuclear deal. However, the fact that Iran does not violate the nuclear agreement is indicated in the reports by IAEA Director General. Because of this, Iran is against the US assertion, and other party of the nuclear agreement also support the nuclear agreement. Meanwhile, there are points that can be found from the more recent statement of the Trump administration. That is, the Trump administration has broader interest than the just implementation of the nuclear agreement on issue around Iran. In a statement on January 12th in this year, President Trump has called on review of the nuclear agreement. There is 4 points among them. It shows on slide. 3 of 4, the problem of Iran's nuclear development restriction by nuclear agreement and acceptance of inspection to Iran by IAEA. The ratification of the IAEA additional protocol by Iran, which is also mentioned in the nuclear agreement, is thought to help eliminate those concerns. In particular, I'd like to emphasize in in the consideration about the fourth point, its ballistic missile development in Iran. Iran's ballistic missile development is also found in United Nations Security Council Resolution 2231, which approved nuclear agreement. However, Iran refuses the negotiations because their ballistic missiles are not to deliver nuclear weapons. Trump administration's policy to Iran nuclear deal are controversial matter. However, such recommendations have shown that the nuclear agreement does not comprehensively solve the problem of Iran. The nuclear agreement showed a way to settle the problem of Iran's undeclared nuclear development, which was developed in 2002 by returning to the multilateral system of Iran's nuclear development, restriction and acceptance of IDD safeguard. Meanwhile, Iranian preservation of uranium enrichment technology and periods of restrictions on their nuclear development or their missile development issues was scrapped in the process of discussion for nuclear agreement. In particular, it is important to think about the impact of nuclear agreement on the security environment in the Middle East region. After the establishment of the nuclear agreement, the United States promised to expansion of aid, including military technical cooperation to allied countries in the Middle East. The nuclear agreement showed a way to the future of Iran's proliferation program. On the other hand, it can be said that the nuclear agreement has not played a sufficient role to eliminate arms race in the Middle East. Next, I will explain the implication for negotiation with North Korea from the case of Iran nuclear agreement. There are many differences between Iran and North Korea. For example, there is difference in the position in the nuclear non-proliferation regime in terms of the rules that they should comply. In terms of the differences of sanctions and effectiveness of sanctions, I think differences such as political system and dependence on the international economy or trade. Then the obvious differences is the ability to and intention to acquire nuclear weapons. North Korea clearly develops nuclear weapons and nuclear forces. Moreover, they are achieving it. And it is more pressing issue for the national security to South Korea, Japan, and the United States. Under some circumstances, this country will be the party to negotiation. And North Korea is also seeking negotiations with these countries. There is considered to be one of the differences from Iran's case. It is possible that the nuclear issue will be treated not only as a violation of multilateral rules, but also as security issues bringing up amongst race. On the other hand, it may be more difficult to set the goal and middle point of negotiations, and it will probably make the outcome of the negotiations more compromising. For example, as an example of intermediate point, we assume that only North Korea's ICBM development is frozen. Missiles that put Japan at range, such as Northern Sky, and the nuclear weapons will be maintained. Of course, there is some means for the security of Japan, even in such a situation. For example, if Japan can maintain a military cooperation with the United States, it will contribute to Japan's security. On the other hand, it will not go away from the composition of arms race competition corresponding to North Korea's nuclear and missile development. And it will remain an obstacle to nuclear disarmament policy of Japan. Finally, it is maybe difficult to apply the way of Iran nuclear agreement to resolve the North Korea's nuclear problem. Even if the model of the Iran deal is applied to North Korea, it seems that it only be a middle point for improvement of the security environment that bring military base to the region. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
So his video presentation was something that none of us expected. If you're interested in what he looks like, you can find his picture at the bottom of the volume. This is actually a new frontier that he actually opened up with the PowerPoint with his narration. So with that, I think we're all kind of surprised to see this going. With that, I'll pass the floor to Murano-san.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. At first, I'd like to great thanks to the Stimson Center and Tatsumi-san to invitation for me this publication project. My name is MASASHI Murano. I'm a research fellow at Okazaki Institute. My work focuses on the strategic intelligence assessment and U.S. defense policy, especially the nuclear deterrence and conventional deterrence and ballistic missile defense issues and so on. So today, in my opening statement, before that, MUKAI-san already pointed out our tough security environments. So I would like to focus on the more specific issues. So my presentation and my chapter title is the 2018 Nuclear Posture Review and its strategic implication in the Asia-Pacific region, including Japan. The 2018 Nuclear Posture Review explains that primary roles of two low-yield options as deterrence against Russia's limited-use scenario. This assessment is rational and understandable for me. However, these kind of systems have global impact, so they also have a very important meanings in the tailored deterrence posture in Asian Pacific theater. So in this sense, I would like to argue that strategic influence of its nuclear force structure and make policy recommendations from extended deterrence and Japan's perspective. At first, in terms of the declaratory policy, the 2018 Nuclear Posture Review completely denies the sole purpose and nuclear no first use policies. It suggests that the U.S. nuclear weapons can be used preemptively, not only for retaliation. So this seems to be related to the reason why the Trump administration reviewed its nuclear force structure, especially with two low-yield options. First one is the low-yield Trident D5 SLBM. Another one is the new sea-launched cruise missile, so-called SLCM or SLCM, as a follow-on system of the nuclear variant Tomahawk, so-called TLAM-N. Actually, the 2018 NPR describes like this: with the retirement of the TLAM-N following the 2010 NPR, the United States currently relies almost exclusively on its strategic nuclear capabilities for nuclear deterrence and assurance for allies in Asia. I think this is an important explanation. So as it is in Japan, the number of media tend to focus on the size of yield and the size of warhead. However, what matters is not only the size of yield, but also the characteristics of the delivery systems. For example, the 2010 NPR has explained that load of the retired TRAM-M could be substituted by strategic bombers and globally deployable dual-capable aircraft, or DCA. Certainly, these aerial assets can deliver B-61 variant. This is one of the existing low-yield gravity nuclear bomb, and its visibility is effective as deterrent signal. In addition, the bombers with the nuclear air-launched cruise missiles will provide the essential flexibility for the regional tailored deterrence posture. On the other hand, the strategic bomber cannot stay in its same airspace for a long time. There are also the promptness of the subsonic weapon systems is not enough to attack time-sensitive targets, such as load mobile missile launchers. So furthermore, even if Japan abolished the 3 non-nuclear principles, especially banning the introduction of the nuclear weapons, I don't think it is not effective. It is not effective way to deploy the DCA with B-61 to forward bases in Japan. So why does it problem? The reason relates the anti-access area denial environment. So for instance, the US stealth dual-capable aircraft such as the F-35A and strategic bombers are hard to detect and intercept in the air. So North Korea and China's leader have some incentive to use their theater-range missiles that are in a confrontation to counter-perceive US advantage for projection capabilities. So this is because the detection and the neutralization have a much higher probability of success while these assets are on the ground. So if China or North Korea's leaders misunderstand the rapid deployment of these assets as intended for tactical nuclear preemption, they may be driven in their analysis to exploit so-called window of vulnerability to degrade it or neutralize US capability on the ground in Japan or Guam with the conventional and nuclear first-like scenario. Although the 2018 Nuclear Posture Review maintained the possibility to deploy the DCA and the non-strategic nuclear weapons in Northeast Asia, but considering the risk of undermining the crisis stability problems, I think the NATO-like DCA-based extended deterrence posture has not been applied in Asia. On the other words, the underwater-based low-yield nuclear option can fill escalation ladder gap caused by the retirement of TRAM-M. The 2018 Nuclear Posture Review emphasis on the US counterforce capabilities and the specific tailored deterrence strategies for each country is described. The demand and these low-yield options has been considered based on the capability assessment through some classified war games and the specific nuclear operational planning. So considering counterforce targeting, in view of the fact that nuclear force of Russia, China, and North Korea are composed mainly of load mobile systems, so it makes sense to target assets such as mobile missile launchers and their shelters or hardened silos. So they are only the ICBM or SLBM means to prompt a disarming attack on these hardened or time-sensitive target. However, nuclear warhead currently tipped on the Minuteman III ICBM or Trident T5 SLBMs have a very high yield, at least 100 to 300 kilotons to destroy the hard target. So if a surface explosion occurs with a large amount of fallout, so they cannot be easily used to the counterforce without collateral damage. On the other hand, the new options, the low-yield D5, low-yield Trident D5 choose a trajectory that can be launched from anywhere and can avoid into the discrimination problems. Furthermore, if ballistic missile submarine approach to the target and launch, they can shorten the time to impact and reliably penetrate advanced air missile defense systems. For example, that if Trident D5 is fired from the nearby the water, nearby the Guam, it will be able to destroy the North Korean mobile missile bases within 18 minutes. So this is faster than waiting until the tactical fighter aircraft is ready and flies over North Korea from in Japan, even South Korea. This advantage cannot be substituted by the dual-capable aircraft, the aerial-launched cruise missiles, or even sea-based cruise missiles. Actually, the speed of sea-launched cruise missiles is inferior to the SLBM. But unlike strategic bombers, it is possible to sustain in some specific area for a certain period of time and move to closer the target. And unlike ballistic missiles, it is an advantage that cruise missile can change the target information after the launch. It is possible to supplement that limited number of ballistic missile submarines with other attack submarines to distribute the distribute to the potential these potential vulnerabilities. And this is because the Virginia class attack submarine, the Block 4 version, would play an important role. If it is used to the common vertical launching systems, theoretically, it is possible to equip some surface vessels with the sea-launched cruise missiles. But usually, Aegis destroyer need to equip various weapon systems, such as some standard missiles to use of the missile defense mission. So therefore, due to that, the cruise missiles, that it is undesirable for limited number of ballistic missile defense capable Aegis destroyers to reduce the capacity for Standard Missile 3 and SM-6. So therefore, the new sea-launched cruise missile should be installed on the nuclear attack submarine, not the surface ship or the ballistic strategic cruise missile submarine. It should be installed on the nuclear attack submarine like a T-LAMEN. So taken together, although the low-yield option is to raise the Russian opposition to the intermediate nuclear force band treaty violation as a surface region, in reality, it is a flexible option to deter North Korea and China, and its play an important role is reassuring East Asian allies, including Japan. So for the further deepening the extended deterrence commitment, the current framework of the extended deterrence in Asia today is the flexible strike capability consisting of the nuclear and the conventional forces. Second, the comprehensive and robust missile defense. The third, joint commitments through the military exercise. And fourth, the consultation mechanism on extended deterrence. I think this structure has not changed so much. The previous mean the 2010 nuclear posture review, and the combination of the hardware and the software are basically appropriate. Then, what kind of the measures are necessary to further deepen these cooperative relationships? Now, I'd like to recommend the new appropriate mix of the regional deterrence structure by the hardware and software solutions. I'd like to pick it up as a number of policy recommendations. The first, the upgrading the extended deterrence dialogue, so-called EDD. The extended deterrence dialogue is one of the consultation mechanisms for strengthening and deepening mutual understanding of the deterrence of the US-Japan alliance, which has been regularly held since 2010. The latest extended deterrence dialogue have held last week at Bango SSBN base in Washington State. In addition, I think we should conducting joint exercise on extended deterrence and the sharing and the formulation of operational plannings including nuclear first use scenario. That therefore, seamlessly constructing its escalation ladder from the gray zone to the conventional and the nuclear domain, a more specific form of the nuclear option should be guaranteed. Based on these plans, it is desirable to repeatedly conduct the US-Japan joint exercise involving not only US forces of Korea and the US Pacific Command, but also US Strategic Command to constantly check and share the practical issues. Among the exercise are risk of the forward deployment of the DCA and the time of crisis, the military and the political utilities of increasing the presence of the dual-capable aircrafts and the strategic bombers, and the frequency of deployment of the strategic ballistic missile submarines in Guam, and as well as low-yield Trident D5 or nuclear sea-launched cruise missiles against time-sensitive targets, such as the mobile missiles, based on the necessity to use them as a prompt disarmament means at the appropriate time, which should also be verified in each operational planning. The second is a robust multi-layered regional and US homeland missile defense and defeat. This element, it is extremely important that the Japanese government decided to acquire Aegis Ashore, this is a land-based Aegis system, BMD Aegis systems, and SM-6 in strengthening the multi-layered US-Japan joint missile defense to cope with the adversaries' combination of the ballistic and the cruise missile cyber attack. So in order to the strengthening missile defense, the coordinate of not only interceptors, but also sensor networks is indispensable. So in this sense, the strengthening terrestrial radar networks, terrestrial forward sensor deployed in the South Korea and Japan will contribute not only defense of Japan, but also to ensure defense of Guam, Hawaii, and US homeland. We should also advance technical cooperation is space-based sensor layer, such as the hosted payload of the space-based kill assessment satellites, and pre-boost phase defense technology, such as the leftover launch. The third, the strengthening anti-submarine warfare against SLBM, SLCM threat, and providing US submarines operational assurance. I already mentioned about this point. Regarding the nuclear force posture, the 2010 NPR, 2018 nuclear posture review does not deny the possibility to deploy the DCA and non-strategic nuclear weapons in Northeast Asia. But in view of the anti-access area denial environment, which is expected to become more severe in the future, so it seems too hard to continue to identify these assets is deployable. So as a result, it is expected that US nuclear force structure in the Asia-Pacific region will tend to rely on submarine-based systems. So in particular, in order to maximize the deterrent effect and its potential efficiency to tactical Trident and the flexible prompt strike capabilities, and the nuclear sea-launched cruise missiles, which is relatively slower and shorter than SLBM. So the allies, including Japan, should formally conduct anti-submarine warfare in the surrounding waters to assure that US submarine forces can focus on the deterrent mission. The fourth, the technical cooperation for research and development, offensive and defensive hypersonic systems. Actually, the Trident D5 SLBM is sufficient to penetrate the adversary's air defense systems. However, before United States, China, and recently President Putin revealed that already have development of various hypersonic systems, such as the hypersonic boost gliders, as well as air-breathing systems. So in particular, because of their altitude and unique trajectory, the hypersonic boost gliders cannot be intercepted by the existing mid-course missile defense systems, such as the SM-3. So we should consider defensive measures against hypersonic systems And also, we need to consider how to offset them by the offensive hypersonic, tactical hypersonic systems. In this context, Japan will begin the fundamental research studies on short-range boost glider systems on fiscal year 18. So this is aimed to the remote island defense, but technically, it is similar to the conventional prompt global strike technologies. So, and depends on the boost glider, it could extend range to the ILBM class. So to accelerate this practical use, and it may be preferable to apply the hypersonic technologies with the United States and other partners. Finally, to strengthen Japan's intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities, and to develop the counterattack capabilities as a part of Allied missile defense and defense systems. In considering damage limitations, it is better to have more strike capabilities. So Japan should seek limited counterattack capabilities. Besides the F-35 with the standoff cruise missiles, something like the JASM or joint strike missiles, and a combination of the submarine and the Tomahawk can also launch a combination of submarine and Tomahawk can be considered. The latest version of Tomahawk can also be launched from torpedo tube. It will fit Japanese submarine without vertical launching systems. So moreover, even if Japan has its own capabilities, they will be functioning within the framework of the US-Japan alliance. So Japan's counterattack capabilities are intended to limiting damage from the second or third waves of the attack rather than be deterrent by punishment. So even if Japan cannot prevent the first salvo attack, it can reduce and suppress the adversary's number of remaining missiles before the next wave. So the probability of the interception by missile defense improves. So it is important to note the targets and the different priorities of different countries. So therefore, when conducting the joint operations, the closer prior consultation on target selection and identification is required. So in doing so, Japan possesses its own ISR capabilities, and it is important to gather intelligence from the peacetime to coordinate adaptive and joint targeting coordination with the United States. So in this regards, equipped the targeting sensor on the Global Hawk acquired by Japan will help to deepen our extended deterrence dialogue as a more practical joint exercise. So let me stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Murano-san. So lastly but not least, Dr. Sato, who
I can't hear you.
Sato-san.
Could you really speak up so that's good?
This one?
Right. So Sato-san will talk about treaty on the permanent treaty of the prohibition of a nuclear weapon and the Japan's dilemma facing this.
Thank you, Yuki. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is HEIGO Sato. Can you hear me? And I'm a professor at Takushoku University, Japan, Tokyo. And I've been here actually for a while. And we had, Yuki and I had been in a joint project in the Stimson on non-proliferation and other issues. And I've been contacting with Brian, which is the president of this institute, for a while because he covers export control, which is a topic which I've been covering for most of my academic life. So as you know, as you see through my face, I am not young and aspiring researcher here. I've been in DC in the middle of the 90s, and since then I came back and forth and debating about various issues related to the US-Japan Security Alliance. And the major issues which I have been dealing with these years is about the exactly this topic, the balancing between nuclear extended deterrence and the disarmament effort as well. And this topic is especially important for us because It is often criticized, not just from the United States, but from the global community, that Japan's policy seems to be rather hypocritic or rather contradicting or conflicting, because at one point we pursue about nuclear deterrence and strengthening the extended deterrence tie with the United States, as outlined by Mr. Murano. And at other point, we are strongly advocating about the nuclear disarmament, which we have history of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which is first, and I hope it will be the last nuclear weapon drops in the human beings. And the Japanese government has been very active on claiming for total abolition of the nuclear weapons. And those conflicting demands are always a topic of our security debate in Japan, and maybe for the rest of the world who watches Japan's security policies. And one of the reasons why these conflicting debates emerge in Japan security debate is one of the answers for myself is that there are many security discussion community within Japan who strongly argue about nuclear extended deterrence, and others being arguing about the nuclear exclusively on the nuclear disarmament. So the debate at one point is seems to be very rational, very realistic, and hard noses, but the other would think that it is more soft and more demanding to the United States maybe, or maybe more idealistic, or maybe liberal in a sense. So those two demands, or those two security communities, really interact with each other. And I think this is a very good opportunity presented by Yuki, that Murano, Mr. Murano and Dr. MUKAI is sit together debating about Japan's security policies. Yeah. And unfortunately, the other OKUDA, who is actually a student of mine, actually from his master's thesis, and he just got Ph.D. thesis in this March 15th. So please congratulate him online. But anyhow, this opportunity is very precious for us, and for myself. When we are talking about those two balancings, I was asked at one point last year at one point to discuss about the nuclear prohibition treaty, or simply a ban treaty, and its implication to the Japan security debates. And I presented a short paper online actually. And I made some comments on the TVs and medias, and I was severely actually criticized from both camps. The security guys were arguing that you are not thinking seriously about the security policy of Japan, and disarmament community are saying that you are demons or someone. You're not seriously considering what Obama administration had pointed out, and that is a global goal and the goal which the human beings should be pursuing. But those conflicting demands actually was very serious when the Abe administration had to make a choice whether they should join the treaty or not. And my argument was that Japan should not agree on the ban treaty because of the two reasons. I think it is elaborated in this paper here. So one point is that the ban treaty itself is a good treaty, but it is counterproductive, as Dr. MUKAI has pointed out, that it will divide the nuclear have and have-nots, so that it will create an unreconcilable nature in the global community, that there will be no practical policy measures left for the ban treaty groups, so that it will create a permanent divide between those two camps. So I thought Japan should not participate in this debate, and it was clear from the outset that the ban treaty group were trying to induce Japan or nuclear umbrella states so that those states joining the treaty might put pressure on the N5 or nuclear weapon states to abandon the nuclear weapons in the context of extended nuclear deterrence. So I elaborated more on my paper, but I thought the Ban Treaty Group was the first step or a first move or first initial step towards the Ban Treaty was to limit the extended deterrence of the N5 to the allied countries. So I thought it was counterproductive, so that I was strongly opposed to the Ban Treaty for itself. And second reason I thought was the U.S.-Japan alliance. And the reason why the Ban Treaty is counterproductive to the Japan security policy and the nuclear disarmament at the same time is, I think, elaborated in Mr. Murano's presentation. And if the Japan should join the Ban Treaty, it might create a condition where we or Japan security policy might have to rely on the nuclear weapons, although it is contradictory. But facing the threat from North Korea and PRC, China, we have no choice other than to rely on our nukes if we are to get rid of the U.S. nuclear extended deterrence. And as you know, those conditions are totally chaotic, and I thought it is not quite easy to make, at least, and it is also the counterproductive for the U.S. global strategy at the same time, which Japan supports them and rely our security measures through which. So my simple answer to my question, or a simple conclusion towards the Ban Treaty debate, is that we should not join if we want to strike the balance between nuclear deterrence and the disarmament itself. And after releasing this statement in Japanese, and thanks Yuki that it is in English at this point, is that in Japan's reaction is very negative, honestly speaking. But I hope this is one way to elaborate those gaps and how to strike the balance. It should be the centerpiece of the Japan security policy, and I hope that the debate would continue to be rich and productive in a manner that it could create a more stable or more reconciliatory atmosphere between the security communities in Japan. So that will end my presentation.
Thank you, Sato-san. We have a few minutes for question and answer, so if you can identify, there's a microphone, so there's a gentleman in the corner, and then right here. And if you can, if your question is targeted to one of them, if you can just specify that, that'd be great.
Steve Winters, independent consultant. Well, I'd direct this to Murano Sensei, because you're so knowledgeable about these technical details. I want to pose this question. Vice Admiral Oda, retired, formerly head of the Japanese Defense Intelligence Agency, stated a few years ago at Johns Hopkins SAIS that the moment Japan no longer believed in being covered by the U.S. Nuclear umbrella, that Japan would go with its own nuclear weapons. So that was his statement. So I would like to ask you, with these various other countries, people talk about the breakout time. For instance, with Iran, does the breakout time 1 year or two? Well, I'm sure you're familiar with that term. And I know the CIA has an estimate for the breakout time of Japan were it decide to have its own nuclear weapons. What is your estimate for the breakout time of Japan should they decide to get their own nuclear weapons?
Thank you so much. I had a specific view about the breakup time of the army for indigenous developing indigenous nuclear weapons. But I had another view about the nuclear arming Japan. Of course, if we are available to develop to the indigenous nuclear weapon in the short time, I think that we couldn't maintain the nuclear sanctuary, something like the nuclear bastion. Like if we are developed to the nuclear weapons, we are knowing to the how do we deliver to those kind of systems. We couldn't develop, and we didn't acquire the strategic bombers. The land-based system is not feasible. So most feasible option is the submarines. But in this situation, we already, probably in the US, already maintain, hard to maintain the nuclear sanctuary of their SSBN under the sea superiority or sea dominance. When we think about our strategic environment to maintain some nuclear submarine bastions or some sanctuaries, probably in this situation, it will be hard to maintain those kind of environment to maintain the survivability of our submarine if we equip to some nuclear missiles.
So what's breakout time?
I don't have some specific views about the breakout time. Sorry.
Hisano-san.
I'm Tetsuro Hisano from Mitsubishi Heavy Industries America. So I think that May is a very important time because JCPOA, Mr. Trump will decide to whether he will provide a very strong sanction towards Iran or not. And also May, Mr. Trump might meet Mr. Kim Jong-un. And also North Korea and Iran has a very close tie in terms of the nuclear weapon development and the missile weapon development. So if Mr. Trump cannot succeed in revise the current JCPOA, there are lots of sunset clause and the missile defense prohibition. If Mr. Trump cannot succeed in revising the JCPOA, Mr. Kim Jong-un might think that the United States is not so strong, like the paper tiger. Then the sanction is a very important measure in the peacetime. But how do you think how can Japan contribute to the such sanction? So, but when we think about the sanction in Iran, China is a strong supporter to Iran, or maybe Pakistan, also China has a close relationship with Pakistan, and so North Korea also, China has a very critical role they provide. But in case of the North Korea, China has so far has cooperative, but when we think about Iran and North Korea, both, how can Japan to contribute to the U.S. plan to make these things happen?
Who's a taker? I'll let you all think about it. In the meantime, I'll take a second question and then.
My name is Hank Gaffney. I worked in defense for 28 years in the Center for Naval Analysis for 23. 13 of my years were based intensively on the NATO nuclear problem. And another 13 years of discussions with the Russians on the whole strategic business. But let me say this. Of course, the U.S. went wild in the 50s and ended up with huge numbers of strategic weapons and what I call theater weapons. I do not use the word tactical, especially the first time I ever ran into the West Germans. First of all, I never, in my 13 years working NATO, ever heard the term extended deterrence. That is what scholars use maybe But the fact was we were rooted in Europe. We never used the term. Now, of course, there is that question of how rooted we are in South Korea and Japan, and we could discuss that. But the point is, both ourselves and the Russians never found any plausible options for use. And I barely heard the term deterrence come up. And there needs to be a far greater discussion of what deterrence is. Now, with the Soviets and the US, it ended up by 1972 as balance. And the numbers to keep in balance. By the way, I should mention that my favorite Russian strategic thinker, who headed their analysis division for strategic rocket forces, noted that both we and the Soviets, Russians, needed 70 tests of any missile to be sure that they were useful. That is, to do what they were supposed to do, especially with accuracy. The second thing he said about missile defense,
sir, I don't mean to,
is that it takes 5 defensive missiles to catch any offensive missile. But the question is, why don't you discuss deterrence more?
So I think with the two together, can Japan contribute? How can Japan? How well? In what way Japan can contribute to the sanction regime vis-a-vis Iran or vis-a-vis North Korea, depending on how things go in May? And why are we hearing more about extended deterrence, but not the straight-on deterrence per se? I think there are some people in the hard-nosed security people does talk about deterrence. So maybe I will first pitch it to Murano-san maybe, and then others can pile on, especially with the question on the North Korea and Iran, since Pakistan seems coming up. So KURITA-san, that's going to be it.
So I would like to ask about the second question about why we talked about deterrence. In my view, that including the preemptive option and how do we retaliate to the mere or preparing to some flexible option is a part of deterrence. This is because if we are faced with some specific scenario, such as as you may know, the NATO assumed to some specific limited nuclear use scenario by the Russian non-strategic tactical weapons under some Baltic invasion scenario. At this moment, that the United States currently have just a huge number, very large yield options, like the ICBM or SLBM. In these situations, the United States, to protect our allies, including NATO and Japan, they have no choice but to start to the full-scale nuclear war or surrender. So we need to avoid into this situation. So flexible nuclear option is one of the important laws, and flexible nuclear option is one of effective way to deter some number to create it to the effective escalation ladder. Of course, that the nuclear weapon is not only the specific way to deterrence. Our deterrence posture including not only nuclear weapons but also conventional weapon systems and the ballistic missile defense systems. I would like to argue to an emphasis on the appropriate mix those kind of weapon systems. So this is the broader comprehensive force posture provided to the effective deterrence. So my argument is including the deterrence element.
Sayuri Romei, Sasakawa, USA. I had a question for Dr. MUKAI. So I was listening to your recommendation about moving beyond deterrence, and coupled that with your remarks about easing the tensions in the region. I was wondering if you were also thinking about a nuclear weapons-free zone. in the region, and there have been many proposals over the years, and if you were thinking of any steps towards that goal, or if you had in mind any proposals about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. Personally, I think having a nuclear weapons-free zone in Northeast Asia is extremely difficult. Simply because we have North Korea and China. And personally, I think that excluding these two countries and building a nuclear weapons-free zone is not worth doing. I mean, if you want to have a zone such as the ones that we have in Latin America or Central America or Africa, we need to include every country that is in stake. And for the foreseeable future, I think that including North Korea and China is impossible. My wordings may be a little bit tough, but I think it's impossible in the near term. So for concrete steps, if we can't have a zone, then what can we do? And one of the steps that I've mentioned in the paper is, of course, easing tensions and confidence building measures. And I think all these will maybe ultimately bring us to a path that we can at least consider or talk about building these zones in the area. But for foreseeable future, I think it's impossible.
Sato-san, you have something to add. I'm sorry, I totally missed it.
I just want to ask the answer to the Mr. Hisano's question about sanctions. As you know, the JCPOA is a multi-year, multinational effort which has been accumulated through years, and it is based on the assumption that Iran other countries have to save Iran's face because they also had facing a domestic problem at all. So just depriving their nuclear capacity overall is not a good option for them for the domestic policy of the Iran itself. So with that in mind, devising a JCPOA is a very complicated task, I think. And in the Japanese policy community, it is still a pessimism that Trump can succeed to do so. But with regard to sanctions, Japan is relatively objective to what U.S. and international communities are trying to do, and rather than just cooperating to strengthen the sanction, I think they are just following the lead of the U.S. and the international community. So that a straight answer to your question about how can we contribute to the sanction in itself, it is just to follow the rules set out by the international community, I think.
Last question goes to the lady over there.
Hi, my name's Jade Wu. I'm a foreign affairs author. Can any of you comment on the funding for nuclear weapons if Japan should choose to go down that road? What I'm wondering is, I understand the Japanese economy is coming out of a slump in recent years. Wouldn't this be a strain on the Japanese economy to get nuclear weapons? If you look at a nation like North Korea, they've stunted their growth so that they can afford this. So where is this money going to come from?
I think I'll start and everybody can pile on after me, but I think that's why you're not hearing Japan going nuclear. I mean, that's kind of obvious.
Exactly.
Because your question fundamentally presumes that Japan will someday might go that way. But if you look at any economic indicator and demographic indicator, fiscally, that is not a sustainable policy, a realistic policy option. And rather more sensible option is for Japan to have a smarter choice between what it invests on ballistic missile defense and what it invests on the conventional defense capability. So that, like Dr. Murano alluded to, have a better, appropriate, more, I guess, fiscally responsible and efficient mix of capabilities to counter this. But that is fiscal is part of the reason why. There were a couple of times, if you look at Japanese domestic debate on the nuclear policy, whether does it make sense for us to go this, that was always an undercurrent deterrent, that it really never gained a core traction within the policy community even. And first step will be for Japan to withdraw from NPT. And that will be a fundamental damage to Japan's international reputation, as even those more of a hardline security policy researcher, policy scholar would agree, but everybody else please pile on. I took a first crack at it. Dozo.
I should have the younger ones to answer, but if you're not, yeah, I would try to add on to the Yuki's point. Yeah, physical burden is very trouble if Japan decide to go nuclear, and we have been debating this issue for about 20, 30 decades, and each last debate I remember is just after the Cold War, that whether we should go nuclear or not, and the clear answer was is it a bubble economy, which Japan's economy was booming. The clear answer to that was we should not, because of the fiscal burden or because of the NPT violations and other reputational issues as well. So, but the other debate which currently going on in Japan is that whether could we rely more on the missile defense capabilities or not. And the debate goes on, and I don't think there no conclusions are yet to reach, but the debate would say that even relying on the missile defense is fiscally very strained for us. As Murano-san pointed out, that we are purchasing the Aegis Ashore from the United States, but even the Aegis Ashore with itself is good for our security purposes, but it is not for our physical realities. So we are debating whether we have another option to make, for example, like robotics, space, cybers, and we are trying to search for every other option which is fiscally sustainable, and the security for the security wise, it is beneficial for our security policy at large.
Anything else?
That's it.
Okay. All right, and then our times now is, I'm sorry, we went over 3 minutes, but I would like to thank all of these people. Actually, everybody either arrived in the United States yesterday, or in the case of Dr. Sato, this morning. And some of them have to turn around and go home tomorrow. So I would like to thank all of them for coming such a long way to talk about their paper, and thank you all for coming. And if you can join me thanking all these wonderful authors, that'd be great. And thank you again for coming.